So I think I'm going to be doing the regular slide. So welcome to the research methodologies class, or whatever you want to call it, session. So I'm so happy to be here, and thanks to Pend Online for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all. So what I'm going to be doing today is I really wanted to kind of like stay on the ball and not really have to go around the research, because you'll be doing a lot of what we are doing today and talking about today. Next week, you're also talking about that with Dr. Pandit. So what I decided to do was I decided to make this kind of like just stay very 101, so that because I don't know which streams you're from, which disciplines you're covering. So I just wanted to have a common minimum where you will think about what research questions are and how to develop research questions. And I have a lot of examples for you to look at, because I know that if you just Google, you'll see so much around that you can read on the subject. So I thought maybe examples and looking at how to develop them and having a few slides on that might help all of you. And the other thing is, when you're developing research questions, it's never a complete process. It's almost like towards the end, you will have to write research questions and submit them to the university, and then they will look at them, and then your supervisor and whoever it is that you're working with, they will go back and forth. But at the same time, while you're working on your research, it's never a complete process. It's an iterative process. So keep that in mind while we're doing this. So the title of today's presentation is Framing Research Questions and Structuring Arguments, but I don't know how far we will get with structuring arguments because we don't have much time. But if you have some pointed questions regarding structuring arguments, just let me know. But I think most of what you're doing, especially when you're talking about research questions and methodology, is also thinking about framing your research and how you are going to get each of the piece in this, the evidence that you're going to get. How is that going to construct what you're trying to tell the world? So that's how we will go today. If you have any questions midway, something, you can just record them in the chat. But I think once we're done, the questions will be towards the end. So my idea is just to finish the presentation because that is all I have to tell you, and then we can talk. So does that look okay? If that's fine, if you have any questions, any concerns, just let me know at the outset. If not, some of you can give me a thumbs up. Maybe Anahita can, because I can see their box, and I can also see Mushtaq. So if you can, okay, thank you, Furkan. So let's begin then. So first and foremost, and I think you can easily, we can make this presentation available if you feel that this is helpful. So what is the research question? So main question that you propose to answer, whatever it is that fascinates you. Mostly what I would say is do something that you're passionate about. Don't choose a research for the sake of doing research. And the other thing is that the research question, usually people just think about the topic and they think that this is the easiest part. But trust me, and I'm sure some of you, I saw a few names in here, and I know they're already working on some things, that the research question is the most difficult to capture. Like, what is it that I'm asking? What I'm interested in is okay. Like, you know what you're interested in, but what am I asking? And how can I get to that point where I can ask questions that are relevant? So that's kind of a very difficult trajectory. And I don't mean to daunt you. And by difficult, I say that it's not as if it's impossible, but you do have to make sure that you have enough knowledge about what it is that you're doing, going to be doing. So this is what you have to do first and foremost. Before anything happens, before you think about questions, before you think about evidence, before you think about what my methodology is, before you think about, what kind of study I'm going to do. Is it a qualitative study? Is it a quantitative study? Again, that is going to depend on your discipline. This is the first thing that you have to do. So I had this supervisor back when I was doing my PhD. I told her that I'm working on, of course, on Kashmir, and I'm working on disappearances. I'm working on all sorts of things that kind of were in the mix. And I told her, so what should I read? She said, read everything that is not your topic. I swear to God, which meant that don't read anything around your topic. So she kind of like wanted me to read widely, just go beyond your topic. And sometimes you don't have that kind of time, but make sure that you're reading everything. It's almost like a constellation, like there's something that you're interested in, and then there are things around it. Make sure that you have your literature review, which is also what you're going to be using in your research methodology. But at the same time, even before you have begun, even before you've begun thinking about proposal writing, you should be one person that knows almost all the writers and authors and researchers who have written in that subject. So make sure you read widely. I cannot emphasize this enough. Now, a lot of people are like, there is some academic secrecy around reading, and I just want to tell you that because it's just very kosher. I want to be honest with you. Not you don't have to read everything, so to speak, but at the same time, you have to make sure that you know most of the things that have been written in your topic or around your topic. And then being a grad student or being a person who is pursuing higher studies, reading is part of your toolkit, so you cannot escape from it. So make sure that you read and also use smart reading skills, because academic papers are written in a certain way. Academic writing, if it's not creatively written, or if it's not from a discipline that is humanities or social sciences, because most of the times they try to write in a more easy and creative manner, academic writing is very repetitive. So learn smart reading skills. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this slide is because without this, you can get to your questions. Without this, you can't really narrow down your topic. You will keep asking people like, how do I develop this? You'll have thousands of conversations. But if you do not sit with yourself every night, every morning, whatever time you have to read, and read widely, I don't think anyone comes to your help. And the other thing I also want to say is, we really look at PhDs and doctorates or higher education as just a means for profession. But I really believe, and I believe for everyone who wants to go into higher education, that you are some sort of seekers. You seek, you want to know more. So don't just treat yourself as someone who is doing something to get to an end. But this knowledge is a process. It's a process of accumulation. It's a process of seeking. So rather than calling yourself a grad student, you can also call yourself a seeker. And that will also help you kind of like relax a little bit and read more widely. So make sure that you're doing that. And then the other thing you also have to remember, while you're trying to look for your topics and what you're going to be doing, that research is not going to be passive reporting. It's not something that you do passively, but it's a search of answers. And these answers are going to be sometimes very original, and sometimes they're going to be just repeating what others have said. So there's no stress. You can also say that, hey, someone has said this, I want to say this again, but in my region. So it can be that also, but it's not just passive reporting, it's very active. So which is why you're looking for these questions. Moving on, now to kind of like get into the nitty-gritty, the technicalities of how we form research questions. And I have some examples for you. Now, before I begin, I don't want to tell you that I just have a wide array of examples. And I tried to develop them in the last 24 hours. So if you notice that some of them are kind of like not really there, that is possible. So we look at them together. So, and the research topics that I've chosen and the examples that I've given, they kind of like a vast spectrum, so that you have an idea of how to do this. So first and foremost, when you form a research question, you have to have a topic at that particular moment. You have to know what you're working on. You have to have a fair idea of what the research looks like in that topic. What kind of, as I said, you by then have read so widely that you're almost an expert of the literature review. You are an expert in knowing what has been published thus far. You only haven't gone as far as to research it yourself. And then the other thing that you have to remember and do is that you have to narrow your focus and narrow your topic down. It has to be completely something that's doable. One can look at it and know that this is doable and how we can get to that point. So once that happens, so you have in your mind, you actually have a title now. And it can change, but for the first round, you really need to kind of like narrow it down. And then what do? You formulate a research question that you want to ask about your topic. So you kind of like go further ahead, and now you're going to be like, I have this topic. So how do I ask questions that are going to help me answer this? And once you have those loose questions, you narrow them further down. And that is basically the process. And I'll give you some examples, but first I want to kind of lay down some things around the research questions. Why are they so important? I mean, you have a research question, but then you also have a set of guiding questions. Why are these questions important? Why is it that we have to have them the moment we have a topic in our head? Because this is a preliminary step in your research process. And there are also specific guides to your research question. That there's going to be specific questions that you'll be asking that are going to make up your research. And as I said earlier, they are iterative and they may change as your research progresses and as you're writing. And that's not a bad thing. So always maybe your central question will never change, but sometimes that also changes. So be kind to yourself. Once you write them down, the moment you start doing your proposal, and then you have these research questions, you kind of like treat them very tentative. You know that they're going to be there, but they might not be there in the same form. Because your research and reading and your conversations, your field work, that's going to all affect and impact these questions that you have at the outset. So I would say that if you have a successful research, your research questions will fairly change as you move, as you get new information. And why do you have them? Why do you have these, the central question and the guiding questions? You have them because this saves you time. You're not kind of floundering around your research. You know what you're looking for and you go for it. And then does it change? As I said, it is an iterative process. It's going to change. So moving on. Again, reiterating why questions are important. They will address the specific issue, and then they will also help you break your study into manageable parts. So I'll give you some examples as we move on. And the most important is that they help you determine what kind of research you will do. Will you do a qualitative research? Will you do a quantitative research? And your questions always focus on the outcomes. What's going to be the outcome of this research that I'm about to embark on? And what am I adding new to this topic? So those questions are going to address that, which is why make sure that as you are starting to think about your research, think about your topic, you have several questions in mind, and one of them is going to be the central question, and the other questions are going to be the guiding questions. Now, before I move on, I do want to kind of like reiterate a little bit about a thesis. Some of you might have this question, and before that kind of like surfaces, let's kind of get this sorted and out of the way. So you have research questions, then you have thesis, and you also have hypothesis. So what's the difference and what are the similarities? And are they all different things? And if you have any misgivings and questions about this, we can take them in the Q&A. Right now, I just want to say that a thesis statement is your position on the topic. What do you say? What do you think? And it's often a research question, but it's kind of reworded in a way that manifests your position and your stance. And the main difference between the thesis statement and a research question is that your thesis statement makes a claim upfront. It's you saying your stance that you will validate in the study. So that's one thing. And then you have thesis and hypothesis. So for hypothesis, that's a legal proposition that is based on existing knowledge. And then that serves as a starting point of your investigation, which can be proved or disproved. And for thesis statement, it's a point or a claim that you make, and it can be maintained, it can be proved. So that's kind of like some things that you have to, these are parts of your research research proposal. So make sure, and they depend on the discipline. Some disciplines don't really require you to have a hypothesis. You might have a thesis. So like for anthropology, we don't have any hypothesis. We don't really do quantitative studies. So this is this hypothesis we don't really believe in kind of like proving and disproving something. It's always kind of adding to the knowledge, and we'll talk more about that. And that also connects to how you see and formulate and structure your arguments and your research questions. So now let's look at a few questions that are few topics and see how we can kind of like turn a topic into research question or into a thesis statement as well. So this might be helpful for some of you. So let's think about a general topic. And one of the examples that I took was, let's say I'm interested in female Kashmiri writers. So that's where I want to research. Let's say, let's say this is a student who is doing gender studies or women's studies in Kashmir, and they're interested in female Kashmiri writers. And what could the research question be? And the question that's going to guide their inquiry into the topic. Now they're interested in how women write, what do they write, but what are they going to ask? So I just had some questions here that are easy to kind of think about. They can be different, but they will give you a general idea of how to narrow it down and how to kind of use the research questions. Usually have a how in them, they have a what in them, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So the general topic is female Kashmiri writers. So the research question could be something like, I'm not interested in the writing. I'm kind of like interested in the sociological aspect of it. Say I'm an anthropologist or I'm a sociologist. I'm not a literature student. So I'm going to be looking at the sociological aspect, the anthropological aspect. So I might ask, how do Kashmiri female writers work-life balance decisions affect their writing opportunities and promotion of their work? So note that I use the word how, there's no why. And I'll tell you in a little bit what that means. And then the other form of this, now the general topic is female writers, Kashmiri writers. What, not how, but what impact do work-life balance decisions have on opportunities for writing and promoting their work? Oh, sorry, they have on female, there's some grammatical issue there. So there are two iterations of this question. One is using the how and another is using the what. This is actually affecting how you're going to do this in the field. And then your thesis is Kashmiri female writers encounter impediments that limit their growth. So that could be your stance, and you could prove it, you could disprove it, or it could just remain as is. So then another example could be like, you're interested in thinking about female lawyers in Kashmir. How does, and the research question could be, how does gender affect in clients hiring legal assistants in Kashmir? So you're kind of like looking at their careers, like how do their careers develop? Who hires them and who doesn't? Do they have the full careers that they want to have as a lawyer inside this region? And then you're also kind of like using another iteration of it, which is a what iteration, like what impact do hiring practices of clients have on careers of female lawyers in Kashmir? So now you're using two iterations, like how and what. And your thesis statement could be female lawyers in Kashmir are not hired readily in comparison to male lawyers. And this could even be a hypothesis. And you can even change it. These are not, and again, like if we look at them and then we start thinking about what kind of evidence we have, how do we do this in the field, suddenly these questions will change and you will be moving words. And that is something that I want you to think about. Once you have a topic and you narrow it down, you turn it into a research question as we see here, you will write that down, you will print it out, you will write it 1,000 times in your notebook, and you will see, you will kind of like change it every now and then. You will play on with the questions on your Word document, whatever is easy for you. Because that is the process. That's how you kind of like fine tune them. That's how you kind of like, as they say in Urdu, nok palak durust karna. That's what you do when you have these questions. So the first set of questions is always not the final version or final form that you will have. So why? I mean, the questions that I used had what and how, because they kind of indicate a qualitative study. So if you have why questions, that kind of indicates, not always, but most of the time, it indicates that you're looking for a cause and effect. And that's not what qualitative studies do. Qualitative studies usually look for something that kind of adds to a gap or some confusion, or they're making an entirely new theory. So mostly when you kind of encounter qualitative studies, you will have what and how questions, or even do questions rather than why questions, which is why I had that how and what in highlights. And I was kind of like trying to formulate questions that would produce a qualitative study in the examples before. So now to think about like how do, this is another sort of exercise in narrowing down your topic. I thought that this might be helpful for us and for most of you to kind of like hit on those research questions that you're trying to formulate. So this should be professors, it shouldn't be managers, sorry. So, oh God, so what do you do if you have a topic that you're interested in female professors in Asia and South Asia? So there are three things you can do. You can kind of like limit your topic by location. You can limit your topic by sector, where you're kind of like where they're teaching, or you can also look at a time period. Like these are different ways of looking at your topic. So let's say your narrowed topic is female professors in Asia and South Asia. Now, Asia and South Asia are very big. So how can you further narrow it down? So let's look at female professors in Kashmir. So how can you further narrow this down? So maybe you are looking at their, again, let's say we're looking at their careers. We're not looking at what they teach or how, but we're looking at how do they get promotions, and do they get promotions or not? So your research question, because you have limited yourself by location, and that's different ways of looking at this problem that you've chosen, which is female professors. How is the promotion of women to upper management in higher education departments in Kashmir different from that in the US? So you kind of are doing a comparative study here, and you're kind of like driven by location. And of course, your research is going to throw up new things. Or you're limiting by sector. The first narrow topic for us would be, because now we are interested in, as I said, female professors. Let's say we are looking at female professors in private and public higher education, private and public universities. So we're kind of like limiting ourselves by the sector. But then you kind of like think about Kashmir and think about, is it feasible? Like how many private universities are there? Or maybe you also look at some other countries, or you look at maybe some different states in South Asia. So what you will do is you kind of like, if you are focused on Kashmir, you'll be like, no, this probably isn't feasible for me because this doesn't work like that. We don't have as many private universities. So let me look at, but we do have a lot of government higher education departments. So you further narrow it down to government higher education departments, which would be like maybe higher education, the high schools, or it could be universities and colleges, and you could further narrow it down. And then maybe you could have a question like, how do female professors' work-life balance decisions affect their opportunities to be promoted to upper management positions in higher education departments? So you kind of like looking at a certain group of women, and then you're looking at, you could further narrow it down after this. And as I said, these are iterative questions, and this is an iterative process. You can further narrow them down to, maybe you want to look at only several colleges. You want to look at only the Kashmir University and some other universities. So That's how you kind of like go further and further down, because the narrower your question is, the more chances that it's going to be something doable. Because after everything is said and done, there is a saying that a good dissertation is a finished dissertation, and a finished dissertation usually has a good set of questions that are doable. So then you can also think about how to narrow your topic down by thinking about time period, like female professors in the 20th century. But again, that's very broad. What are you looking at? Who are these people, and which zone of the world is this? Maybe you will look at female professors in the 1990s in Kashmir, or maybe you are choosing some other regions as well. I mean, they can all overlap. You don't have to be location, sector, period. They can all even overlap to make your topic and to make those research questions available to you. So then you can kind of like have a research question thinking about female professors in the 1990s. Now it's kind of it's just the 1990s. So you're looking at a specific time period. You can have n number of colleges or higher education departments in it, whatever is available to you. And then probably you can look at promotional opportunities and job experiences of female professors. How do they differ from male professors in mid 1990s? It should be 1990s. There are several typos here. I'm sorry about that. But I'll give you a clean version of the presentation. So that's how you kind of like narrow down. And this is also like you just produced your first question. These are the research question here on the slide. This is how you kind of like are narrowing down. And then you have your first central guiding question. Now, is this a final question? We don't know. Is this going to be what you end up with? Maybe, some people do stay with their first question that they asked. But if this changes, if you kind of like are doing different changes in words, and you're changing the do, the them, you're changing all sorts of things like, do I want to have a comparison between female professors and male professors? It all depends on what you're finding in the field. And that's how you kind of, it's a participatory process. You're hearing things from the field and they're affecting your questions. So you keep changing them. But of course, the first proposal that goes to someone, especially when you are at a proposal writing stage, then you have to give some questions that look semi-solid, that are going to stay with you, that are permanent. But everyone who's reading your proposal knows that these will change. So the checklist for your questions are, is it an open-ended question? Is it a how and what question? Because why question assumes that there is a cause and effect. So usually we avoid why questions, especially in a qualitative study. And then you also think about, is it appropriate in scope? And I have some examples in all of this. So I'm not going to be giving examples as I go through this checklist. Is my question focused and narrow enough for your project or for your paper that you're writing? Does it suggest factors that can be measured? Because in a research question, you're also kind of like giving things that can be measured. You are guiding the research as well. So make sure that some of your questions do mention or do kind of like manifest that these are factors that are influencing what you're trying to find. Is it relevant to my audience? That's one thing you have to ask yourself, like, who's the audience to my research? That also helps you narrow down in what you're doing. Is answering the question manageable? Can I find and access enough documents, statistics, or persons to provide information to develop and support my ideas? This is the most important. Like, if some people are trying to find, let's say they're doing something in history, and they want to have this archive, which probably is classified and they can't get to it, that is going to be an impediment. You have to think like that as well, that is this doable, whatever I'm choosing to do? Am I going to get the resources? Are there going to be people who are going to be talking to me? And again, I have some ideas regarding this. Is the topic of interest to me? And this is important. Like, you don't want to be doing something that someone wants you to do. You want to be doing something that totally interests you, because trust me, it's more than it's a bigger commitment than if you were to get married to someone, because this is 24/7 that you're living with, and this is going to follow the rest of your life. So make sure that you're choosing something that you love, that you're passionate about. I usually don't like models, but maybe this checklist is called the Finer model, given by Brian Hulley, but this is not a qualitative, we don't use this in qualitative studies, but I thought that as you are in a research proposal writing stage, this might help you in fine tuning your questions. I won't go through all of them because they're kind of, I don't want to kind of read everything here, but I'll just quickly give you a rundown. Is my question feasible? Am I going to be able to examine, collect, and answer these questions? Is there data available? Are they interested? Are these questions interesting to people who are going to be reading in this discipline? Because first and foremost, when you produce research in academia, you have to know that your fellow academics will be interested in reading this, because you have to get jobs, especially if you're thinking about outside Kashmir. You have to get a job. You have to know that it's research that's going to answer something that's a topic that's fascinating and that's new, and you're bringing some new knowledge to the table. And then also novel. Again, it kind of is sort of an iteration that, are you bringing some new insights into the field, or are you confirming existing research? That is also because people are looking for that kind of knowledge. So is it novel? And is it ethical? Are you doing, you have to make sure that you're not going into populations that are vulnerable, populations who have been taken advantage of. So, and your university, wherever you get your admissions, whether in Kashmir or in South Asia or outside, they're going to make sure that you're doing research that is not impeding the vulnerable communities, probably most of you might work with. And are you following all the rules? Are these questions, they shouldn't be intruding into people's lives and changing them for worse. So you have to make sure that your research questions are ethical. And as you're writing those questions, ask this finer model of your question. And then relevant. Is it relevant to the discipline that you're working within? And of course, like, relevancy is also to do with, is it bringing any change to the society? So these are some of the things that you want to keep in mind as you are developing your research questions. So now we kind of like try to do some of the things that we did with the other ones, but this is how to improve your research question. And it might kind of like seem a little repetitive, but it's not. I promise you, this is doing something different, where we are kind of like taking a question that's too broad, where we're kind of like giving an overview. So if you have a problem, and then, the problem is that this question is too broad. And what's the example of a broad question? What's the history of novel writing? What are you going to do with this question? Is this doable? If you kind of like apply the finer model to this, or if you just ask a very common question to this, how am I going to do this? Like, what history of novel? Is this based in UK? Is this based in US? Where is this even coming from? Like, what's the region? What kind of novel are we looking at? So it is too broad. And maybe the second example of a very, very broad research question would be, how does lack of gender sensitivity in an organization affect the general workplace? Again, this is like, where are we working? Oh, how am I going to get answer to this? What is the location? What is the time? What is the place? And so you have to kind of like start thinking about narrowing it down. So how can we narrow it down? So let's try this. Let's focus on a specific subtopic that kind of comes under this. So we could be looking at, what's the history of Kashmiri novel writing in Kashmir between 1931 and 1975. I chose them randomly, the dates. But it kind of like gives you an idea that you can look at a specific location and you can look at a specific time period, as we did earlier. But this is kind of how you start thinking about your research questions and fine tuning them. And similar is what is a narrow question? Something that is too narrow, and how do we improve that? A too narrow of a question would be, the example is, I don't know how all of you look very young and are of course very young, but there was a bookshop called Kashmir Bookshop on the Polo View, where the I forget the name now. Sorry. On the Polo Street, there used to be a bookshop called Kashmir Bookshop. It was probably only one of the 2 or 3 bookshops in Srinagar. So it closed down in the early 2000s, I think. So if you were to make a research question out of it, you would say, how did the closing of Kashmir Bookshop in Srinagar affect the reading habits of Kashmiris? Now, this is too narrow of a question. Like, how are you going to think about one bookshop and who would go there? And you kind of like assuming, or maybe not assuming, but you kind of like thinking that it must have affected the entire Kashmir. This is too narrow of a question. Or if you were to think about, does Hong Kong have universal health care? The answer here is obvious because you can do a simple Google search and then it's not much of a study. So how do we kind of like make the Kashmir Bookshop question a bigger question, like thinking about a larger context and creating a topic that's going to be not only investigative, but it's also helpful and make us understand how people in Kashmir read or what have they been reading. So maybe you could be doing something like, what influence did access to less bookshops have on reading habits of Kashmiri students between 1995 to 2008? So you kind of, I just threw in the dates in there because I thought that, that also gives us an idea of how to further narrow it down. But let's say you started doing this and then you found out that you don't have much data between 1995 to 2008. So you completely do away with the time period and you say, I'm going to look at this from, let's say, whatever time till current period, because you have data for that. You have met a lot of people who are going to talk about this. So that's how you kind of take a narrow topic and then kind of make it into a bigger, larger context, but you also have a pointed, narrower focus. So for the Hong Kong question, like, does it have universal healthcare? You could be doing something like, how did healthcare professionals influence the political process that enabled Hong Kong to establish nationalized healthcare? So you're actually doing the same thing. And I'm not saying that this is some kind of a shallow way of looking at it, but now you have a more, you kind of like have factors that you'll be looking at, but you probably are answering the question like that it does have universalized healthcare and it's nationalized and they're doing really great. So your research is going to find out that why they're doing so great. What was the political process that enabled them to do this? So you pretty much are kind of like a detective here. You're kind of like going to these places. So sometimes a researcher, it might really, it might help you to think of yourself as a detective, like going back and sort of like, constructing all of those things that made this current situation. So the other question that kind of looks very narrow, that's the problem with it, is what decisions made in secret meetings caused the US to institute the Planetary Defense Coordination Office? Believe it or not, that is an office. I didn't know till yesterday. So how are you going to find this information from secret meetings? I don't think this is possible. So if you're also looking for some archives that are classified, so that's going to be a question that is probably not doable. So your research committee is going to say, how are you going to do this? That's going to be the first impediment, not even getting to the archives. The first impediment is going to be people asking you, this question is not possible. So instead, what you could be doing is you could be talking about the same thing, but you could say what factors influence the formation of Planetary Defense Coordination Office in the US. So you don't have to go to the secret meetings, but you are looking at the entire process and the secret meetings could be part of that. And you could get some information about those or not, and that doesn't matter to your research. So this is how you kind of like have research questions as you are developing them. And this is how you kind of like narrow them down from what your topic is first and foremost, which you narrow, and then you kind of narrow it further down into the research questions and how those research questions are going to feed your main question. So look at it in that manner as well. Tosif, am I going over? I have several more slides. Do you think this is too much?
No, that's absolutely all right. You can take your time. Maybe another 10 minutes and then we'll let it open for the questions and answers.
Okay. So again, I just wanted to more focus on questions and how they could look like, because I feel like maybe we can do a little exercise later on. So for example, this is a completely unclear research question. How should social networking sites address the harm they cause? Can anyone drop in chat why this is an unclear question? Just a line or two, or all of you, or some of you, whoever whoever wants to answer, or you can just open your mic and just answer. How is this an unclear research question? How should social networking sites address the harm they cause? Rizwan has raised his hand. Yeah, you don't have to just go ahead because I don't think, yeah, go.
Yeah, so speaking of how should social network sites address the harm they cause, firstly, to begin with, they don't specifically refer to any particular social networking site. Be it Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And secondly, what kinds of harms? Is it mental? Is it physical? Is it something to do with terrorism? Or that's how.
So it's completely unclear. And you said, who am I listening to right now?
Yeah, it's Rizwan here.
Okay, Rizwan. So I think you're right you exactly said what's clear and unclear with this. It doesn't specify the social networking site or what kind of harm, and it also assumes harm because again, this is somewhat of a why situation that where you're kind of thinking about something that is happening. So it hasn't been proven or disproven yet or accepted. So the easiest to clarify this would be we would specify the sites. We would also change the question a little bit, and what actions should social networking sites, even if you believe that they're causing harm, or you have data that kind of says that there's a lot of harm, so you want to explore that. So you would say, what action should social networking sites like Facebook and Instagram take to protect users' personal information and privacy? And so a strong research question should never leave room for ambiguity or interpretation. It should be upfront. Everything that you're saying should be upfront. So this is an example of an unclear question and how to clarify it. And then an unfocused question. Again,
Professor, can I just say a word actually? I
yes.
think there is also it's a very normative question, I suppose. So it cannot be, it would depend, I think, on maybe different societies will answer it differently. So that way, I think this this question is not a research question, to my knowledge actually. Because
yeah, of course, yeah, it can further be narrowed down, definitely. But here it's kind of this question, that the way this question is shaped here, it's actually looking at only Facebook and Instagram. It's not looking at the people. This question, as it was the unclear, because it says only what action should social networking sites take. So it's focusing on the networking site. So it's kind of saved itself from the societies because it's only looking at the sites. But of course, societies will be a part of it, but not part of your main question. So you're right in saying that. But the way this question is worded and the focus of the question becomes the social networking sites. So that's how you kind of try to corral yourself to a narrower topic. So example, unfocused question. What is the effect of environment on the environment from global warming? So I won't ask you because I think it's pretty obvious. It's broad and it can't be adequately answered because what are we talking about? So the focused would be what is the most significant effect of glacial melting on Kolahai Glacier, which is already melting in Kashmir. So now you have a specific effect of global warming, which is glacial melting, a specific place, which is Kashmir, and a specific landform that is affected, which is the glacier, the Kolahai Glacier. So it also requires you to take a stance on this as a researcher, because you have to, because this is affecting something, so you will kind of also have a thesis around it. So whenever you have a doubt about what you're doing, make sure that you are crafting your questions that are very narrow, very focused, very doable. And your professors and your mentors, your supervisors, your committee members, they will all be interested in doable research. They want you to enter the university and they want you to leave the university. Trust me, no one wants you to be there forever. And these questions will help you. So again, simple and complex questions. This is too simple. Like, how are doctors addressing diabetes in Kashmir? You can sit and do a simple Google search and you can produce maybe a 50-page paper on this by only doing Google research. So how do we kind of like complicate it, but at the same time, have some information for people that's going to be usable, that's going to be something new that you're offering the field. So the simple version, which is how are they treating the diabetes, it can be quickly answered. There's no room for analysis. You just have to, because as I said earlier, it's not passive reporting. You're not doing passive reporting as researchers. You're bringing something to the table. So maybe we could kind of like change it to what main environmental, behavioral, and genetic factors predict whether Kashmiris will develop diabetes, and how can these commonalities be used to aid the medical community in prevention of the disease. So now this is adequately and appropriately complex, where you're kind of like talking about all these factors, which means that you have to go out and, dirty your feet in the field and get more information about this. And then you're going to produce a thought-provoking research, which requires investigation and significant evaluation from your side. And it's also going to add to the knowledge that is present in this area and in this topic. So one rule of thumb is that if you choose a topic, or if you choose research questions that can be easily answered by Google, that can be easily answered by a book or two, that's not the research you want to be doing. So it's not going to be an effective research. So I'll quickly go over this slide because I don't think we have that much time, and I don't want to bore you too much. So there are a couple of ways that you can kind of like look at the research that you're reading or the reading that you're doing in order to find what it is that you want to do. One of them is gap spotting. It's identifying. So when you're reading this, let's say you read tomes and tomes, and now you have a great wide array of reading in your topic. How do you arrive at what you want to do? So you might want to identify various gaps in the literature, and that could be where you come in. And also, gap spotting is kind of safe. It doesn't challenge assumptions in the existing literature. It just addresses the gaps. So there are three basic ways you address these gaps. One is confusion spotting. That means when there are contradictions in the literature, you read two papers and both of them are saying something different. I have several examples, but I don't want to give any more examples. I just want to kind of say, if you read two papers and two of them are saying different things about, let's say, about the glacial melting, one is saying, no, it's not happening. The other one is saying it's happening, but you have evidence, you kind of have seen this happening around Kashmir. You'll be like, okay, I can talk about Kashmir and I can bring this in. And that is going to be confusion spotting way of trying to come up with your research questions. And then also neglect spotting. If something has been overlooked, if something has been under-researched, if something has been said, but it doesn't have enough empirical data, and you can come in there. So again, it's all connected to how much you're reading. And then also application spotting, which is an alternate perspective that you give, that this literature needs to be extended. There needs to be more to this. There needs to be complemented. This needs to be supplemented. So these are ways that you can read, and you can kind of like compare different articles. You can compare different researches that people have done. And then in those, you can, I hope, Tausif, are you calling me?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I don't know.
I get a call from my end.
Okay, so no, I just wanted to make sure that it's not anyone from here, but because there's a phone number.
No, you're good.
Okay, so these are different ways that you can arrive at narrowing your topic and also then fine-tuning your research questions. And it can be a combination of all of this. The other one that I really want to talk about is problematizing. Problematizing is something that brings something fresh to the table, brings new research to the table, brings new theories to the table, and it does something very important. It challenges the assumption. So in gap spotting, you're not really challenging the assumptions. You're kind of like looking at different research and saying, oh, this is a research that's been done, I can add to it, and you can criticize them, critique them, you can bring something new to the table. But in problematization, you're actually taking cudgels with the research. You're very skeptical. You know how some grad students, they are not skeptical at all, and some are very skeptical? It's kind of that different situation where some look at research and they want to add to it and everything is good. But problematization is going to be, it's not just simple bringing something new to the table, but you're actively critiquing what has already been written. So one of the ways that you can describe it is that how and to what extent it might be possible to think differently instead of what is already known. And this is a quote from Foucault. So problematization is also the way in which you kind of think about your research questions, that are they bringing something to the new to the table? Are they challenging some assumptions that have already preceded? So I think I talked about this. And how many research questions do you need to have? I would really suggest have 3 research questions or 6, whatever. But the basis is 3 to 6, minimum and maximum, not more than 6. Then it's going to be too much for you. That's not doable. And 6 is too much already. I mean, for me, I feel like I had maybe 1 or 2 questions. But for some, you might have 1 guiding essential question, and then others, like 3 could be your guiding questions and 1 central question. But they should all be linked, and they should all be answering your main question. They should all be feeding your main question. That's how you look at it. So I just tried to come up with these. I don't know how good they are. Again, as I said, they can be improved. So maybe your central question is, these are 2 central questions. How does gender affect in clients hiring legal assistance in Kashmir? And the other question is, which is also a central question, what impact do hiring practices of clients have on careers of female lawyers in Kashmir? See, these are, in a way, these are both iterations of the same problem, like female lawyers in Kashmir. So these could be your main questions. These are the iterations of the same problem, but in a how and what format. And your guiding questions would be, like, how do I answer this main question? What kind of data do I need to answer this? So you kind of like draw a flow chart in which your main question is, like, how does gender affect in clients hiring legal assistance in Kashmir? And then the guiding questions would be, how do clients find out about which lawyers to approach? So you can figure yourself out, or you can kind of like imagine yourself asking this question of someone, because that is going to get you to your main question. That's going to feed your main question. And then another guiding question might be, do clients consider gender of the lawyer before hiring? And another question might be, how much impact does legal fees affect hiring lawyers? Or how much does public opinion factor in the decision? So your guiding questions usually, like, you have 1 central question, and there are the iterations of the same question, like a how and what. But then all of these are basically feeding the first question. They are gathering answers as to how to answer your central problem. And they have to be really, and all of these, if you look at them, they're taking you to different places. They're taking you to different people to talk. They're taking you to different literature. They're taking you into the field. So your research questions actually tell you how your study is going to look like. Do you have to talk to people, or do you only have secondary sources? So it's very important that you write your central question, whatever your proposal is, write your central question today. Write your guiding questions today, and take it further from there, because you're going to kind of write them, and then you're going to revise them, and you're going to go back to them. And also try to imagine how each question is unfolding in the field, because that imagination is very important. I don't know what my next slide is. Yes, asking yourself about your readers. I think, and reviewing your question. I talked about this. I think we are just about done. Yeah. I think we can end here.